Why
So
don't
you
you
get a
do
break.
Tortoise next, and I'll take a little break.
Sounds good. Okay, so we've got Tortoise with their album TNT. In the opening montage, you heard the title track TNT, and now you're going to hear Swing from the Gutter. All right, Matt, what are the stats?
TNT by Tortoise comes in at number 198 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 17 in 1998, number 1032 of all time. It is Tortoise's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Tortoise ranked number 479 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Okay, this album came out March 10th, 1998. They are a post-rock band formed in Chicago, Illinois in 1990. The original members of the band are they're also personnel on this album. So that's Dan Bitney, Doug McCombs, John McIntyre, and John Herndon. David Pajo, formerly of Slint, joined a little later, once after the band formed, and replaced their first bassist. And then Jeff Parker, who's on this album, joined the band in '96. John and I covered them once before with their previous 1996 album, Millions Now Living Will Never Die. That's in season 4, bonus 16. They have 7 albums, and this is the third one. So the genres are post-rock, jazz rock, experimental rock, dub, krautrock, and minimal music is a new one that I saw. Influences, Can, Sonic Youth, Noi, Yes, Faust, and Brian Eno, all bands that we covered on the show. Similar artists, Godspeed You Black Emperor, Sigur Rós, Explosions in the Sky, Mogwai, Slint, and Stereolab. No charting on the Billboard for this band, no surprise for that. And some fun facts. They gathered praise early on and attention early on, partly because they had 2 bassists and 3 percussionists. They switched between drums, vibraphones, and marimbas on their earlier albums, so no traditional 4-piece setup for this band. They have been cited as one of the prime forces behind the development of the post-rock movement. And this album was essentially pieced together in the studio using nonlinear hard disk studio technology. So my understanding, based on some other stuff I read, was that they just kind of put it together piecemeal. None of the members of the band were necessarily ever together when they were recording stuff. They would just kind of like jam out, put it on a hard drive, and then kind of like piece it together or edit it in a way that everything kind of came together. So that also is kind of like non-traditional as well. This album expands the band's instrumentations using other artists. So there's violin, cornet, bassoon, trombone, and cello on this album. John McIntyre stated in an interview with Billboard that he said the band's focus had shifted towards emphasizing treble, and he felt an urge for the band to use mallet instruments on the album. So that's interesting. I had never thought about treble as a sound that I would be searching for. They did a 5-month world tour to promote this album, starting in Europe in April of 1998. And the material for this album was arranged over a long period of time in the studio. And the band had to rearrange the songs for the tour. A magazine article described as the curious position, I think John McIntyre said this, the curious position of having to learn the songs from the record to cover them, as it were, highlighting the postmodern reversal that turns live performance into a stimulation of the recorded original, the real into a copy of the virtual. So they didn't even really know how to play the songs. There was no like traditional structure. They never practiced the songs. It was all kind of like free form. And so when they went on tour, they had to like listen to the album and learn how to play the actual songs. McIntyre told the magazine, quote, that none of these songs were really played by the group together at one point ever, which is why we're having such a hard time now trying to learn to play them live. It gets even more confusing because a lot of the stuff that's recorded was just done on a whim, and you can't even remember what it is or who played it. So yeah. So that's interesting. So John and I, we talked about that previous album and we had thoughts on that. Go back and listen to it. Let's start with Matt. What did you think of TNT?
Man, this is different, huh?
Yeah. Post rock.
Post rock, and like it's very. So, I was aware of Tortoise. A buddy of mine from college liked them, and I think I even heard parts of that record that you guys had covered. That the album cover definitely looked familiar, but I never really explored them in depth. My initial take was, especially with that opening track, jazz, right? That opening drum riff is kind of like, wow, this is kind of like a jazz kind of drumming that's happening here. And then when they started playing all the instruments coming in, I'm like, damn, this sounds like freaking Miles Davis, specifically, like not even like in a silent way, like the album that came out before Bitches Brew, where it's kind of like this electronic jazz fusion going on. I was like, wow, this is okay. I wasn't aware that this thing was kind of happening still. And then of course it goes in these different directions. They start using like, I don't know, like the Glockenspiel or whatever. It sounds like something that Peter Gabriel would use. You know, that was kind of I think that was maybe 10-day interval. And then the next song, I Set My Face to the Hillside, is kind of like a Western kind of score from like a Clint Eastwood film or something like that.
Yep.
So they're throwing that in there. I didn't think of krautrock right away, but it came eventually. I'm like, yeah, this is kind of like this experimental krautrock type thing. And as I was listening, I listened to it a couple of different times in different ways. And one time I was kind of just outside and I had it on, and Sherry was listening to it, and she's like, yeah, I think I kind of like this. She's like, it's kind of more background music for me. And I'm like, actually, I see how you say that, but at the same time, like listening to this on headphones is really cool, because like and it's interesting the way that you said how the album was created, that they weren't ever really playing together. They were kind of just, and it's almost like you can kind of hear that in a way.
Yeah.
Like I found it really interesting to kind of, let the beginning of the song work out and then like think to myself, what are they going to do next, right? Because they rarely just kind of start with a vibe and kind of just continue that through. Like many of these songs at different parts, they're throwing in different instruments, they're throwing in different almost like time signatures and sounds and stuff like that. And it's an album that really kind of keeps you on your toes in a very mellow way, right? This isn't really anything that's terribly that rocks out, really, right? It's not something that they're plugging in a lot of distortion. It's kind of more subdued sound, and I get like it does function as, I think, kind of background music, like as a jazz type record would. But I think that if you are able to kind of like put down everything else and just kind of like listen to this, maybe with or without headphones, although headphones is probably, you're going to get a more intimate listen here, I think that that's where it really stands out, and you can kind of like, wow, what are they doing? Like, it's just like, and I was wondering, did they write this? Is this just a jam? Like, I was kind of confused as to exactly how this was put together, because it's very unique, particularly in this time frame, the late 90s, that something like this is out there. And certainly, it's not all jazz. There's just definitely like some of those other bands that you mentioned, like a band like Slint or whatever, other rock bands that are kind of more arty, right? Like this kind of fits into that as well. So all instrumentation, like no vocals, so that's another unique kind of aspect of this, and certainly something that is not going to move the needle a whole lot in terms of pop culture, or being on the radio or MTV or anything like that. But damn, what a cool sound this is. And I think that this is, I probably listened to this about 3 times, and I think I'm just scratching the surface here. I think that this is a record that would demand more listening, and would reward that I feel like I would appreciate this the more I listen to it. So, but a good first start. Was definitely impressed from the first listen, and was kind of a nice little deviation away from kind of like stuff that we've been covering lately. So yeah, thumbs up for me. I thought this was very cool.
It's funny, Josh, that you mentioned he was experimenting with treble, because as I was putting my thoughts down sonically in production, like I had a good idea sonically and what it evoked, but production wise, I couldn't quite put my finger on what was going on. And now when you talk about it, I said, that's it. It's like the jacked up treble, right? And the reduction and sometimes non-existence of bass on some of these tracks. So that was like a good for the bio. It kind of filled in a little bit of what stood out. This is such an interesting album. This is the second straight album we've covered by them. That's a really, really interesting album. You're right, Josh or Matt. There's jazz here. Like I got the krautrock immediately on this one because there's some electronic elements in it. There's some space in it. There's small metronomic passages. It doesn't run through the whole song like the krautrock. I laughed when you said mallet instruments, Josh, because I heard a lot of like xylophone-esque type sounds, I'd say, throughout it that I felt served as the percussion in quite a few songs. And since you don't hear a lot of xylophone and those types of instruments, it stands out when you hear it, and then when you hear it in 4 or 5 different songs, right?
Right.
It's there. Then you've got there's like Spanish guitar that just floats into one of the. I think it's I Set My Face on the Hillside, right? Like it comes in. There's found music sounds on this album, like different like things you'd hear in the world, right? Which gives it that art and experimental feel. There's musical solos in like brass and woodwind instruments, I feel like are there. There's just all kinds of stuff going on. You're right, Matt. It's like impossible to listen to this once and just get the pieces. I also didn't want to like overly intellectualize this. I think for me, how I would categorize this, and it's a thumbs up for me, how I would define this one as sort of an exploration of sound and musical genres falling into the overriding theme of improvisation and collaborative sounds, right? I think they're playing around with taking a couple different sound textures from different identifiable music, whether it be krautrock, electronic. I know a lot of people mention them in like dub. There's guitar in this. There's a little bit of rock, jazz, and they're just creating compositions that kind of blend them together with the overall idea of what does this sound like, I think would be how I'd say. And one time I listened in headphones, so that really makes you pay attention because these sounds are just coming into your ear, sometimes right in the front, sometimes in the back, and so you have to pay a lot of attention. But also if you play it in the open air, right, it could also serve as background where you almost get like the rabbit thing where like from time to time you hear a sound that like perks up your ears a little bit and you're like, oh, that's an interesting or surprising sound that I wasn't expecting. I also am always interested by albums where it feels unformed for large parts of time, and then there becomes these very technically proficient patches within it, which is something that I found very much it is like a krautrock / music concrete type thing where it's like, oh wow, like it's delved into music as I traditionally understand it, right? And I think that makes it effective if you're in the right like headspace to listen to it. I also think the more and more time that goes on in the podcast, I've realized how there's like a discipline that needs to come from listening to this type of music that can only be, I'm sure there are some people that wake up and they're like, I'm ready for Tortoise, right? And there are a lot of people that are like, I will never be ready for a band like Tortoise because I don't want to be there. I think what's been cool for me is I do feel like for me, I needed the reps, right? Like I needed to listen to a lot of music that pushed me to be more observant and also have more awareness of certain sounds that are in certain genres. Not that it's not necessities, but like I need to kind of understand what they're going for, and also the forms of music that they're both adhering to and deconstructing from, depending on what they're going for. And I think the more you listen to artists that do that, as well as the more you listen to the artists that reside in those genres to get the literacy in that, I almost feel like you learn a little bit about music composition over time, and you need to know a little bit about music composition to, I think, fully appreciate these albums. And I'm not going to claim to be an expert at all, but you know, you listen to almost 1,000 albums in all genres and you pick up some things along the way. Um, I would say that for me, there's a couple tracks that were really standout for me. I like the suspension bridge at Iguazu Falls. That's the one with the Spanish guitar, but I like the mix of sounds in that. There's a long track at the end, Jetty, which I really like too. And normally I'm not a long track guy, but I just found myself sort of captivated by that one from the beginning. And I think the album starts extremely strong with TNT and Swung from the Gutters. Those are the two songs I actually picked for the playlist along the way. And you're never bored on this album because I found myself with each track going, I wonder what this is going to encompass. And then I almost like took inventory at the end of each song. Like, what did I hear? What did I catch? And what did I not catch? And then the second time I listened to it, I saw like what continued to stand out and then what things were added on. And that's cool. I enjoyed that. It is a little bit of an intellectual musical experience. So for those that don't like a little bit of thinking in their music listening, this probably isn't the album for you, but I'm here for it. So thumbs up for me.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more avant-garde kind of albums we've listened to recently. I wouldn't even call it, as you guys pointed out, it is like wholly instrumental, but it doesn't feel like a film score or anything like that. It is way more like exploratory, and I do hear the krautrock influence on this album because at the foundation, there's always kind of this like driving or repetitive beat going on in some form or fashion. And I think that's more apparent kind of in the earlier tracks, but it has this like rhythm. The songs have these rhythms to it, and then they kind of like branch out in all these like different directions. And like you guys said, sometimes it's like one instrument, and then all of a sudden there's like all of these like instruments coming in and kind of working cohesively to create this sound. It's a very kind of atmospheric album, I found. I listened to it on headphones as well. I thought it was a pretty good night album. It is, I appreciated it because it's not like some of the more avant-garde, fully like electronic albums we listen to, like the KLF or some of those other ones that are like...
It kind of is a weird take on drum and bass at times too, which we've been listening to a lot of recently, but a completely different way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like a mishmash of like more traditional like orchestral pieces mixed with some electronic stuff. Sometimes I feel like they kind of shift what's in charge, like towards the back half of the album, it's like it feels like more electronic and less like orchestral. I also picked up on I Set My Face in the Hillside kind of being like Western, like a Western movie sounding, like Morricone soundtrack type of feel to it. There's I think one of you said about the found sounds, there's like sounds of kids playing in the background, or almost like you're at a park or something, like at times, or people talking. On Almost Always Is Enough, that has a weird like high pitched like almost sounds like somebody saying something, almost like an alien saying something. It's like really like it's really weird, but I found myself like not singing along to it, but trying to like imitate the sound, because it's almost like when a dog like yells and you think he's almost like trying to talk or something. But yeah, this was an interesting one. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I appreciated that it was different than everything else this week, and kind of felt like more accessible than some of the other electronic stuff, like I said. So I appreciate kind of it truly is like post-rock. There is no kind of like, drum, bass, guitar, vocals type of setup. They are not trying to follow traditional structures of songs. There's no like choruses here. There's no like, any sort of thing that would be what you're used to if you don't listen to this type of music already. So like John said, it is kind of an intellectual exercise, but I was here for it this week. So mild thumbs up.